How are you, my friend?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me, Robert. It's great to see you.
It's so good to see you. I think it's been a year, 2 years since we saw
I
each
think
other.
2 years probably since the last conference in Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, like I was telling you offline, just finished reading your book. Well, one of your books. I've only read the Bitcoin Standard originally. Now I've read Principles of Economics. This is awesome.
Thank you. Glad to hear that.
I've read a lot of Austrian economics, and my chief complaint, and I think most people's chief complaint, is that it can be obscure and dense at times.
Yeah.
I think you've done a good job at simplifying it as much as practical without, losing the essence of the message. So
Thank you. Yeah. That was the goal basically behind my book. I think one of the main motivations of writing my book, was my brother one day asked me, I'd like to read about Austrian economics. And I wanted to recommend something that could give him a good idea about Austrian economics in general, not one specific topic, not economic history, for instance, or not something specific to the applications of it to the real world. And then the only books that I could think of were Human Action and Man, Economy, and State.
yeah,
And these are great books, and I love them. But, my brother's a doctor. He's a very busy person. He doesn't really have time to go through Man, Economy, and State. As much as I love Rothbard, he's my favorite author, I just can't, in good conscience, tell my brother to wade through 1,400 pages of very dense economic theoretical discussions when there are a lot of very important ideas there that he should be able to get without having to go through all of these really dry academic debates. So I thought I wanted to write something that could just deliver the essence of the main ideas about Austrian economics, because I think they're very valuable for people's lives. I think, understanding what capital is, understanding what time preference is, understanding how to think about economics, economizing, all of these things I think are very, very important, and people benefit from them. And you don't need to complicate them to the point of reading a giant book by Mises written 80 years ago or by Rothbard 60 years ago. You can simplify them. So that was the goal. So I'm glad you like it.
well done. I haven't read all of Man, Economy, and State, but I read Human Action, which is also one of my favorite books, but it's very Germanic and kind of difficult to read. It's not normal English, if I could say that. So this is a great one for everyday modern readers, I think, to get to the meat of it.
Glad to hear that.
I want to ask you, so time preference is one of the concepts you've popularized in the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? It was really the Bitcoin Standard that put that concept on the map. And I often find many of our conversations coming back to that. It's like, what's the problem here? It's like, oh, it's fucking time preference again. This is, if Bitcoin fixes all these things, it's like, because Bitcoin helps with time preference that it fixes all these things. I want to ask you about the relationship between time preference and maturity. Have you heard of the marshmallow experiment?
Yes, yeah. I mentioned it in the Bitcoin Standard, yeah.
So that seems to be a proxy. So the marshmallow experiment is roughly like, and correct me where I'm wrong, they offer small children one marshmallow now or wait 10 minutes and get 2 marshmallows.
Yeah.
And the kids that defer and wait to get the 2 marshmallows tend to have better outcomes later in life, right? In terms of financial outcomes, health, relationships, all these things.
Yes.
So children exhibited a lower time preference. And that, I guess, is another way of saying that the child was more mature than the child that took the marshmallow immediately. So when we describe time preference, are we describing something like the process of maturation for ourselves individually and collectively?
Very much so. I think, children, when they're born, they have an infinitely high time preference. I think I noticed this with my children. One thing, just a small little aside on parenting, hopefully might be useful to some of the listeners. But I think one of the horrible things that you could do with children is to give them a choice about certain things. Like very young children, I've noticed this is extremely counterproductive. If you try and tell a child, all right, you can have the candy now, but you won't get to watch TV later. Or if you have if you do the thing you want to do now, then I won't let you do the other thing later. And then you give them a choice. The child will always choose the immediate gratification. The child is completely incapable of ever discounting, of ever thinking about the future. They're always very heavily discounting the future.
Right.
And so you're setting yourself up for another tantrum if you're trying to negotiate your way out of a tantrum by saying, okay, I'll give you this thing now, but then I'm going to get something else in exchange later. You're setting yourself for another tantrum because there's nothing that you could tell them that would make them give up the immediate gratification if you make it a choice, because they're just going to discount things. So you could tell them, I'm going to inflict very severe punishment on you in a week from now if you don't do this, or in an hour from now, or in it doesn't matter. They can't register it. They have to think. They can only think about what is going on right now. But as they mature, as they grow up, they start becoming more and more capable of providing for the future. And I think this is a very important part of rearing children and helping children grow up, is to try and help them lower their time preference, to understand that you can give up things now and benefit from them in the long term. And as people grow up, I think they develop this. Not everybody, perhaps. Well, I mean, everybody lowers their time preference to some extent, but some people don't lower it enough. But I think what really goes a long way towards making it happen is having children. I think having children really lowers your time preference.
For sure. Yeah, it forces you to think about life beyond yourself, right? Feels like nature kind of flips a switch and puts you in legacy thinking mode to some extent. And that probably, I mean, I have a young daughter, but it seems like it compounds over time. As you get older and your children get older and you see them coming online, you start to think about their future and such.
Yeah, and I think you could think of it in a very simple biological sense. A part of you, a literal part of you, is now alive, and it has a longer life expectancy than you. So let's say you're 30 years old, you expect you're going to live another 30 to 50, 60 years old, or another 30, 60 years or so. But now there's another part of you that has a much longer life expectancy. And you care about her life or his life. And so suddenly you're focused on the long term a lot more. And you see this in how people's perspective shifts in life and in politics. After they have children, they become a lot more long-term oriented. And the things that bring us joy and pleasure as young people start becoming a lot less meaningful after you have children. So you see this very commonly. People don't enjoy clubbing and partying and drinking or drugs as much as they do, as much as they did before they had children.
Just being with their kids, which is amazing. Yeah, it's funny too, because a lot of the literature says like all of your quality of life metrics go down. Like you're sleeping less, the financial situation's less, blah, blah, blah. But somehow meaning in life goes through the roof.
Yeah. And of course, all of these metrics where they try and look at the difference in the quality of life. Well, yeah, if you look at it in the first few years, but parenting is a very long-term investment. Yes, you give up a lot of sleepless nights, and you deal with a lot of poop for quite a while. But then you've got a companion for life. You've got somebody who'll take care of you when you're older. And so it's very premature. And, like pretty much most of the things that you see on the TV these days, it's just stupid antinatalist propaganda. Just to look at the financial impact in the first few years of childhood.
Yeah, such a great point. So then collectively, because you often say if we're lowering our time preference as quantified by the natural interest rate, right, as that's coming down, then civilization is becoming more mature. Like, are these parallel processes that we go through internally and externally?
Yeah, I think the process of civilization, as Professor Hans Hermann Hoppe, one of my favorite economists, also another Austrian, he says the process of civilization, we could think of it as the decline of time preference.
Yeah.
And I think I agree entirely. On the one hand, from an economic perspective, the decline of time preference is necessary for us to have any capital. It's the delaying of gratification that creates capital. You have to give up consuming something valuable today in order to dedicate it to the process of production. One way or the other, you're going to be foregoing satisfaction now. And that's true at the very simple level when you're a fisherman on a deserted island and you spend all of your day catching fish. If you want to build capital, you have to take time off from leisure, from the time you spend lying around on the beach, and from time that you spend producing the fish, catching fish with your own hand, and you need to dedicate it into the capital production process of making a boat or a fishing rod. So you have to give up fish, and you have to give up time on the beach in order to be able to have the boat. And it's true to the most sophisticated capital markets that you have today. The only reason that we have all of this incredible amount of infrastructure that we have in the world, all of these giant airplanes and boats and all of these companies that are producing things that pay out over decades, is because people are foregoing consumption. Every single piece of capital out there today has an owner, and that owner could convert that into a consumer good.
Yeah.
You could sell every yacht or every share in a yacht. You could sell every car factory, every airplane factory, every airplane. There's an owner to that, and they could sell their capital and have consumer goods.
Yeah.
You could sell that and throw an incredible party for your friends.
Yeah.
And every day that ship operates or that airplane operates, that it only operates because somebody is giving up on that party. Somebody's
Yes.
giving up on that immediate gratification.
Yeah.
So you have to reduce your time preference to be able to think about the long-term payoff in order for there to be capital. And so that's from the economic perspective. But then concurrent with that and almost necessary to come along with it is as we develop more and more capital and we increase our productivity, it's necessary that we develop the social institutions that allow us to cooperate with one another, to trade with one another, to engage in long-term business deals with one another, and to be productive in the long term with one another. And that requires the civilized norms of behavior.
Yes.
And that comes with that. And that necessitates a decline in time preference. So it necessitates that you start thinking about other people, not just in terms of, oh, well, I can take his stuff. If I beat him up, I can take his stuff. You have to get rid of that kind of mentality and start thinking, no, if I don't beat him up, then he won't beat me up as well. And if we both agree to do that, then we're both able to cooperate.
Yes.
And we're going to be producing a lot more than what we could do. And I think this is really the case for civilization is ultimately, it doesn't matter how much you can take from somebody, you can benefit a lot more by cooperating with them.
Yes.
So even the most powerful, strongest man in the world, if they try to just be aggressive against humanity, it's trivial for humanity, even though we're all weaker than him.
Yeah.
It's trivial for us to control him, kill him, subdue him, because we have access to capitalism. We have access to
Right.
cooperation. We have access to the fruits of the division of labor, which are possible only because we are civilized.
Yeah.
We have a low time preference. We cooperate with each other. That's why a 5-year-old girl with access to a gun that she obtains from the division of labor is able to shoot the most powerful man in the world and kill him with a small gun. And so entering into this world where we cooperate is massively beneficial to us. And we would never have a tiny sliver of the amazing things that we have if it wasn't for cooperation.
Yeah.
And that requires a lowering of time preference. And that's the kind of overarching theme of principles of economics to describe how the act of economizing is really at the foundation of civilization as understood broadly, not just in economic terms.
Yes.
It requires the capital of civilization, but perhaps even more importantly, or as importantly, it requires the mentality of cooperation that only happens because of the decline in time preference.
Yes. Well, it's wonderfully said. And so we quickly get into the moral domain, basically, right? When we're talking about time preference, private property, etc. I think Hoppe makes this point in his book, Theory of Socialism and Capitalism, that something like the integrity of private property determines the moral progress of society, right? So for instance, if private property is, let's say, inviolable, then the only thing you can do is go out and satisfy consumer wants better, faster, cheaper, right? Through consensual trade to gain wealth. Whereas if you're violating private property to acquire wealth, then you're rewarding like coercion. And so it's a matter of like the reward system, right? Are we going to reward productive consensual activity, or are we going to reward coercion and theft and all these things? And that line seems to be private property.
The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by thesafehouse.com, my independent publisher and bookshop, selling the best Bitcoin books in high-quality cloth hardcovers built to last for generations. Most books these days are pretty fiat. They're flimsy and they fall apart quickly, and I did not want that for my books, so I set up the Safe House especially to provide you with beautiful, long-lasting classic cloth hardcovers you can proudly pass down for generations. You can get copies of my 3 books, The Bitcoin Standard, The Fiat Standard, and Principles of Economics, and you can also get copies of Lynn Alden's Broken Money, Parker Lewis's Gradually Then Suddenly, and Matthew Lysiak's Fiat Food, to which I contributed a few chapters. We now offer bulk discounts so you can buy books for yourself and for the friends and family you'd like to learn about Bitcoin. Buy any 2 books for $50, any 5 books or more for $20 per book, and for more than 50 books, it's only $15 per book. Go to thesafehouse.com, the SAIF house.com, where you can get all of these books in high-quality cloth hardcovers, delivered worldwide, and get 10% off for paying with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by the Daylight Computer. I love to work early in the morning and late at night, or in the sun outdoors, but regular computer screens are terrible at these times, and they strain your eyes. For years, I've wanted a paper-like electronic screen on a simple computer I could use to write. I tried several models, but none were very good. Now, finally, Daylight have delivered a fantastic full-function tablet with a paper-like screen that's easy on your eyes and great for outdoor use. I've been using the Daylight computer to write my next book, and it is absolutely fantastic, and it has led me to invest in this company myself. Check out my interview with Anjan Kata in episode 249.
Exactly. I really think that's the case. And that's the point that I try and make in Principles of Economics. One of the early chapters discusses the concept of property, and it lays it out as the foundation of everything that comes later. So the book, the way that it's described, the way that it's divided is trying to explain the main concepts of economics, but doing it in a way in which they build on one another in order to arrive at the final chapter, which explains human civilization as the culmination of all of those things. So we think of economics in terms of economizing our time, economizing our labor, and then we think about economizing our property, and then we can use our property in the form of capital, and then we are able to develop institutions to trade with one another and to increase our productivity, which then leads to the development of a market economy built around money, and then that leads to the impersonal system of exchange, where civilization happens because people are able to deal with one another without having familial ties, without needing to have repeated interaction with one another. You can just, to a very large degree, trust that other people are out there working to serve you, just like you're working to serve them. And then that creates the system of cooperation that leads to us being able to have all of the incredible things that give us the life that we take for granted. And I think the fundamental point that I'm trying to make is that, you know, the benefits of capitalism and the benefits of cooperation and the benefits of capital accumulation and civilization are not just things that are secured once and for all. It's not a button you press and then it's activated for life. It's something that constantly requires us to engage in the behavior that produces those things. At the moment that we stop, we can see all of this fall apart, and we can see it's all collapse, and we can see it all go away. And that's essentially what you see happening when society and civilization falls apart. And in order for that to remain, in order for that not to happen, you need private property. If you undermine the system of private property, everything else falls apart. And that's how I end up discussing the book, discussing the concept of civilization at the end of the book, which is that if you undermine private property, and, you know, fiat money in particular is a huge way in which this is undermined, then all of the different pieces of the civilizational puzzle fall apart. And the impact is not as it is often portrayed. You know, it's not like the damage is all right. We're just going to have a little bit less nice things, a fewer number of dollars, as Donald Trump sometimes presents it. It's not that. It's if you don't have a system of cooperation and private capital, you're going to end up with the complete destruction of civilization. We
reverse the flywheel of civilization.
Exactly. We end up basically at the mercy of nature. We're basically completely powerless against animals, against nature, against rain, against storms. And so in order to have all of those things, we need to wake up every day and engage in civilization. And if we don't, we destroy all of that. And that requires private property. So the lesson that I'm sort of trying to communicate from this book is respect private property.
Yes. Amen to that. Same drum that I'm often beating on the show, but it's a little too abstract for people. I'm not sure why. It seems to be more useful to talk about money oftentimes because people have more of an embodied experience of dealing in money versus the abstraction.
And when you understand the significance of it, I guess you begin to understand how much of our human institutions are geared toward just driving that lesson home.
Yes.
And as you say, it's a little bit too abstract. So it's kind of difficult to communicate it to a 15-year-old that, look, the only reason you have a roof over your head, the only reason that you're not out there running away from animals and avoiding getting eaten is because of existing in a system where property rights are protected. Difficult to communicate that. So we see that all of our institutions are centered around that. We see that religion is all about that. We see that the state is all about that, or at least the propaganda of the state is all presented in those terms. And in so many different ways, all of our culture relies on communicating those ideas to young people, because if you don't communicate those ideas to young people, you no longer have a culture. You no longer have a civilization.
Yeah, so going back to like the maturity thing, it's if you have high integrity private property, then you're creating the incentives by which people will think more about their future selves, which is lowering their time preference. I guess when you lower your time preference enough, you end up outside of yourself, right? Because we're all mortal. So you start thinking about the children and, your legacy and who's going to inherit your private property, all of these things. So you engage in long-term planning beyond even your life. But so we maybe just try to focus on money because that's less abstract. The printing of money is a violation of private property. Now, printing of money is, the artificial expansion of the currency supply under a central banking paradigm. It's kind of like a colloquial term for that. But it's violating the private property of savers. So then it's raising their time preference, which is making them think more short term and then contributing to all this cultural degradation, increase in the prices of goods, decrease in the quality of goods, all of these things. So is it too much? And if we take Hoppe seriously, it's also contributing to cultural, moral degradation. Is it too much of a stretch to say that the integrity of the money supply maps onto the integrity of civilization itself, or at least the process of civilization?
I think so. I think this is really, I would say this is perhaps my original contribution on the issue of time preference in Austrian economics is to make this explicit link between societal time preference overall and the hardness of money.
Mm-hmm.
And, Hoppe discusses this, but within the context of property right. And Guido Huntsman also discusses this from the concept of the implications of inflation on society and the moral implications of of inflation. But I think I like to present it almost in a mechanistic engineering way, thinking of it as being essentially the control knob. I think of the hardness of money as being like a control knob for the time preference of society, because it's very, 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 very visible. It's very visceral when you look at the impact over time. You're able to identify this over and over again. You see it very obviously that you can destroy the currency, and then overnight you can see how everybody's time preference increases.
Yeah.
You read books about Weimar Germany.
Yeah.
You read about Zimbabwe. You read about Lebanon, Venezuela. In all of these countries, when the currency is destroyed, when the value of the money is destroyed, people's time preference necessarily has to rise enormously. So their focus becomes a lot more about the present, a lot more about today. And that's just completely natural. If you were, if you had savings in the bank that you thought of as being something that you wanted to keep for 20 years, let's say you're a 30-year-old and you're saving in the bank and you've got 20 years expenditures in the bank, you could stop working today and be able to support yourself for 20 years. And then you wake up one day and it's 10 years. And then you wake up the next month, it's 5 years. And then the next month, it's 1 year.
Yeah.
And then the next month, it's gone. And it's just enough to last you until the end of the month. Well, naturally, all of your plans for 10 years from now, for 20 years from now, all of these are going to be put on hold.
Yeah.
All of the things that you were planning on doing at that time are going to become a lot less certain. You're less likely to get married. Let's say you were in a relationship with somebody, you were planning on getting married, you had the savings, you were going to buy a house, and now you can no longer buy a house and you can no longer provide for yourself. And you're basically no longer really ready for marriage.
Yeah.
So you're less likely to be married. You're less likely to think long term. You're more likely to be involved in a short-term focus in the way in which you act in your relationship and everything that you do. And financially, you see it, and you see it in terms of your behavior, and you see it in everything, including crime. You can think of crime as being essentially a manifestation of high time preference, because when you're committing a criminal act, you're prioritizing the benefits that you can get right now over the long-term damage. And the long-term damage is A, you get caught, you get thrown in jail, or you get killed. And B, the long-term damage is that if you live in a place in which you are stealing, then people are being robbed, and these people are going to likely engage also in other kinds of theft as well. You're going to be on the receiving end of this. And not only are you going to be, even if you're not on the receiving end of it, you're going to be on the receiving end of the implications of living in a society in which property is no longer secure. People are going to save less. People are going to invest less. People are going to be less productive. People are going to be wasting significant amounts of their wealth on securing themselves. And that's just going to degrade the ability of everybody to accumulate capital and increase their productivity. So you discount all of that. And, you can also think about it in a religious sense. You discount the religious punishment that you would be getting because it's all long-term. It's all hypothetical. Whereas your hunger today is a lot more visceral.
Yeah.
And so the destruction of money naturally destroys your ability to provide for the future. And you can see this in a very functional sense because money is the technology we use to provide for our future. We store value from today and provide it for the future. That's how we do it with money.
Yeah.
Money is the most effective technology we have. Yeah, you can accumulate capital goods, you can accumulate durable goods, but they're not as good as money for saving for the future, for providing for the future. Capital always carries risk with it. And of course, when you destroy the money, you destroy all kinds of forms of capital.
Yes.
You destroy capital accumulation. So you destroy the possibility of the businesses to make money because all of their customers lost their wealth. So all of it goes together. The destruction of money destroys capital as well as destroying savings. And so it does everything to destroy your ability to provide for your future long-term self.
That's well said. The whole idea of hyperinflation being like the most reliable way to induce a mass psychosis. Like anywhere you see hyperinflations occur, right? People are obviously your circles of trust collapse, right? You can't interact with strangers peacefully because the money doesn't work. So you're maybe with just your family and possibly a couple of friends of people that you can actually trust and cooperate with. When all that cooperation collapses, I mean, people are incentivized to be immoral and scam. I mean, they're just desperate, basically.
Yeah. I guess a good way of thinking of it is that what you see happening during the process of hyperinflation is in very fast motion.
Yes.
The opposite rewind of the process of civilization.
Yes.
And it's sad, but that's just the nature of things. I think it's G.K. Chesterton, who has a quote about that it's some things are just a lot more difficult to, most things are a lot more difficult to put together than they are to destroy.
Destruction's easier than creation.
It's a lot easier than construction. It's very, very difficult and long-term to be able to slowly build the circles of trust where you start interacting with people and not expecting them to violate your property and steal things from you. It's very difficult to slowly accumulate capital, increase the productivity, go through the natural process of discovery where a lot of that capital is going to be unprofitable and it's going to be destructive. You need to be going through that process slowly, accumulating capital slowly, lowering time preference slowly, cooperating more and more, increasing the circles of trust, and eventually developing what we know as civilization, which we sort of, by the time we have it, it's such a gradual process that by the time, it's constantly happening, but at its later, more advanced, most beautiful stages, people take it for granted. They just assume that this is how we are, and they don't make the connection between the reaping and sowing, between the acts that you need to put in, the fact that you wake up every morning and you behave in a civilized way, and the conclusion, which is that you have those things. So we're unable to draw the connection, and so we can very quickly bring apart the things that we had worked very hard to put together.
Yes. Yeah, I'm reminded of the seen like kind of the purple-haired type wokists typing on their laptop with a sticker that says capitalism is evil on it and stuff. It's like while they're drinking their Starbucks latte, and it's like they're in a performative contradiction, right? Like,
absolutely.
So it's easy, to your point, like to take it for granted, right? That our ancestors have done so much over time to accumulate this capital, lower time preference, create private property rights, etc. And then we are at least partially unwinding it through the corruption of money or the debasement of currency, because, well, savers, you're making it harder for them to relate to their future self, which is making it harder for them to plan for their future, which is making it harder for them to be civilized, largely.
Absolutely.
What does Bitcoin mean then to us? Like, is it, because if it is this money with a perfect supply integrity, right? 21 million, it can't be debased. Does this then energize the process of civilization? Do you see this as becoming, I don't know, like this is one of the most interesting areas of Bitcoin to explore. Like, what are the implications? How do you see this in the long run affecting the process of civilization?
I basically see it as being the reversal of the process of civilization. In other words, the 20th century was the destruction of money, bringing apart all of the fabric of civilization, bringing apart all of the very elaborate construction of civilization that humanity has been putting together for thousands and thousands of years. And, it wasn't all plain sailing, obviously. It's not it's always been a process of ebb and flow. We put a lot of bricks together and we build something nice, and then we witness horrible destruction, and then we have to start over again.
And it's an incentive thing too, because like we build up economic surplus, and then you kind of get this socialist or whoever that wants to come in and take from that. So it's like, as we create the surplus, we also create these incentives for people to abdicate from private property.
Yeah, I think it's pretty, as an Austrian, generally, you want to avoid and generally the Misesians and the Austrians like to avoid thinking of things like the iron laws of history. We don't like to think that history has laws in the similar sense that the natural sciences have laws. Yet nonetheless, we witness a pretty recurrent theme in the rise and fall of civilizations, and there are many authors have explained this across many civilizations and across many times. Not only do we witness the same process, but we also witness historians documenting the same process, describing it in very similar terms. So, John Glubb is a great author. Recently, he wrote something similar, I think in the 1950s or 60s, he wrote a book about that. Ibn Khaldun, the old Arab philosopher, had described this. And Anthony Gibbons, in his description of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and they're very similar themes, which is that the accumulation of capital leads to growth in economic cooperation, and leads to wealth, and it leads to capital accumulation. And then you get a generation that doesn't value that, and then it begins to debase the money. And with the debasement of the money, obviously here you could argue whether it's the debasement of the money is a cause or an effect, but it almost doesn't really matter, because all of these processes are happening at the same time, and you can see them, and you know what you want to avoid, and what you want to not do. So they all come together. You see the collapse in morality, you see it in the fall of the social norms, and you see it in the basically the people become a lot less concerned with important things like their long-term well-being, and more focused on short-term trivialities. You see with the destruction of money, and it seems like it is an almost inevitable process. Yet, maybe Bitcoin is, in a sense, a state change in that process. I mean, I think we could say, the less bullish case for Bitcoin is that it saves this civilization now. It gives us the next run of civilization for the next few hundred years, where we are able to witness this derailment of the fiat civilization as the fiat world is falling apart. We're able to protect ourselves. Everybody in the world is able to protect themselves by just logging onto Bitcoin and then escaping the destruction of their money and entering into a world with a money that is appreciating, that allows you to save for the future and protect yourself and take care of yourself. So that could be kind of the base case, giving us another civilizational renaissance for the next few hundred years. But it may just be truly different than distinct from all the other forms of civilizational rise and fall. Because it's always going to be there as an exit. Everybody's always going to have access to it. So we may end up going on a Bitcoin standard, and then we may end up repeating the same process of over hundreds of years, centralizing the money, and then having an authority that is able to prevent people from having access to the money itself, and then they give us a fake representation of the money, similar to fiat money, paper money, credit money. It could be a digital form of that happening in Bitcoin over a couple of hundred years. But maybe because Bitcoin is always accessible, because anybody can use it, and because the technical barrier for using it continues to become more and more accessible and surmountable for people, maybe this is just our civilizational escape. Maybe
an upgrade.
Years.
The Bitcoin Standard podcast is brought to you by CoinKite. CoinKite are my favorite makers of Bitcoin hardware. They produce the legendary Open Dime, the first Bitcoin bearer asset, as well as the reliable cold card hardware wallet, the excellent stainless steel seed plates for storing your seed phrases, and the block clock. Now, CoinKite have produced the Sats card, a card the size of a credit card which can store Bitcoin and works great as a gift. CoinKite have just produced a limited edition gorgeous Bitcoin Standard Sats card, which carries the Bitcoin Standard logo, and you can get it from coinkite.shop/Bitcoin Standard. Use the code Bitcoin Standard to get 5% off your purchase. This podcast is also brought to you by the Bitcoin Way, your professional Bitcoin IT team offering you personalized, secure, and comprehensive solutions for every step along your Bitcoin journey. The Bitcoin Way offer live concierge service to guide you with your Bitcoin cold storage, running your node, privacy best practices, inheritance planning, corporate strategy, and multi-sig solutions. They don't touch your coins, they guide you through the process of acquiring your coins and securing them. If you'd like to make your setup safer and more reliable, book a consult with them and see what they have to suggest. If you want to give someone the gift of Bitcoin, get them this professional service that will ensure they start off knowing exactly how to manage their coins and not lose them. Go to thebitcoinway.com and start Bitcoining more confidently.
Yeah, well, you know what? It makes sense because I don't think, in reality, causality doesn't seem to be linear. It's always feedback loops. So you're describing, like, we figure out private property, moral society, we build up a lot of abundance, but then there's this, like, temptation that's created in parallel for people to go and pillage that abundance. And that is the kind of weak times, make hard men, that whole cycle. But if we have Bitcoin somehow takes those same incentives, but channels it into the integrity of the money, right? That, like, actually as abundance grows and those men rise up that want to steal your shit, well, then you're just going to give people more of an incentive to go into a brain wallet and go somewhere where they're treated better, right? It's like all of a sudden voting with your feet in a Bitcoin world carries a lot more signal. So then I would expect government to become more local and then more accountable to the preferences of their customers, broadly speaking. And that seems like something that, like a phase change, as you described. It's like not something we had before. It's something fundamentally different.
I agree. I think it's just ultimately very different because specifically on the issue of money. However, I'd even argue, as I say in Principles of Economics, arguably what Bitcoin represents is something very, very traditional, as old as human civilization itself, which is that we've always had aggression. We've always had attackers. We've always had forces that are not human, that are trying to sabotage human civilization. And we've always triumphed against them. And we've also had forces that are human that have tried to do that. And we've always found ways around them. I mean, obviously they've landed some very hefty blows over time.
Of course.
But generally humanity finds a way because humanity has reason.
Yeah.
And this is another theme that keeps running through the book. And it's, it's an idea Mises keeps emphasizing, and I tried to channel him in this book, which is that what separates humans from other animals, what's really our distinct superpower is our reason, our brain. Yeah. We're not the fastest animal, we're not the strongest animal, we're not the biggest animal. We are simply the one that is capable of using reason the best. We can reason. And that's what allows us to have dominion over all the other animals. It's not even close. We're the ones who put them all in cages. They don't put us in cages. We can control them. We can protect ourselves from them. So we've always, with our reason, triumphed against animals. We've triumphed against nature in many, many cases, although, of course, nature is very powerful and it continues to triumph against us. We still get earthquakes and horrible things. But we keep finding ways of triumphing, and we keep finding ways around it, and we keep reducing the damage that it does to us, and we keep increasing the levels of protection that we have from it. And I believe Bitcoin is just another layer of this. We've always had within humanity, we've always had forces that have always undermined humanity, undermined civilization. We've always had the more high time preference people that have always been destructive towards civilization. And we've always found ways around it. We've invented weapons and ways of protecting against them. And I think Bitcoin is the latest iteration. It is the most formidable problem. It's the most formidable attack. It's the one that has lasted for a very long time. It's undermined civilizations for thousands of years. But here we are. We finally found one that allows any human being to use without having to rely on political institutions, without having to rely on the mob. I think this is really the key distinction. It used to be without, there's an Arabic saying, إذا جنوا ربعك عقلك ما ينفعك. If your people lose their minds, your brain is useless. I think it's very, very true. It doesn't matter how low your time preference. It doesn't matter how much of a civilized person you want to be, how much you want to cooperate. If everybody around you has lost their mind, it's pointless.
Yeah.
You can't get anything done if you're living in a society of people that have lost their minds. And so we've always been governed by this because we always have to use everybody else in order to have money. If we were to have access to a form of money, we needed to have everybody else in the society use that form of money.
Right.
And so if everybody falls for the fiat scam, if everybody falls for the coins that are clipped, if everybody falls for the coins that have been degraded with base metals, all these, that destroys the financial system for you, and it destroys your ability to use money, and it destroys your ability to be part of capitalist civilization. But now with Bitcoin, I mean, here we are. How many Bitcoiners are there in the world? Probably less than 1% of humanity are Bitcoiners at this point. And yet they're able to save, they're able to trade with one another, they're able to find a liquid market pretty much everywhere in the world. People are buying and selling Bitcoin everywhere. Even in places like Gaza, with all of this death and destruction that's taking place, Bitcoin still works and people are still able to use it. So no matter what happens, no matter how crazy the people around you are, you're still able to access a civilized capitalist system and a form of money and to trade with people. And I think that is enormously, enormously valuable.
Well said. It's such a civilizing force on so many levels. Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question. A couple of minutes we've got here. Austrian economics. It's the only economic science that actually makes any sense at all. All right. Keynesian economics, when you start to peel back the layers, is, I think, one of the archetypal examples of a pseudoscience, right? It's complete bullshit, or at least that sounds too harsh. It's applying, you often use the term physics envy, right? Where it's applying sort of mathematical principles to a domain where those are not applicable. And one of the chief reasons is that there are no constants in human action, right? Every time you take water to 0 degrees centigrade, it freezes. So we can develop frameworks of knowledge around that, but you can't do that with human interaction, obviously. So it's more rationalism, less empiricism. Why has this not propagated into mainstream economic science? Is this a money, you talk about this some in your book, that the money printing cartels, central bank cartels, are using the proceeds stolen through that operation to fund this pseudoscience and to propagate it as truth and to suppress Austrian economics. What can we do to get the principles of economics into more people's heads other than waiting for Bitcoin to monetize?
Yeah, I think this is the reason I think these ideas are just not popular is that they don't pay the bills of economists. At the end of the day, in the fiat system, since money was taken over by central banks in 1914, really, World War I was when modern central banking was born, unfortunately. Since that point, the money in the business of economics has always been in trying to justify the printing of money. It's just, once you have this this hack of the system, once you've managed to exploit the system in this way where you're able to access the money printer, then there's an enormous, enormous reward for coming up with propaganda that justifies this. Because if you justify it, if you can develop the political capital to develop this, to allow people to do something like this, then you're going to have an enormous amount of rewards for from using the money printer.
Yeah.
So you can understand the capital, you can understand modern economics that is taught at universities, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, as essentially being money printing propaganda. It's propaganda for the printing of money.
Right.
And so in order to justify the printing of money, it needs to hang on to the pretense of scientific objectivity.
Yes.
It needs to pretend that the mathematical equations are objective and that the central planners are just benevolent planners that are doing the best that they can to give you the best outcome for you and for everybody together as a society. In the same way that an engineer is trying to make the car as safe, as reliable, as efficient as possible, they're trying to manage the economic system to be as productive, as efficient, as useful for society as possible. And so if you have this halo of scientific objective legitimacy, then you're able to justify all of these monetary shenanigans as if they are basic common sense, as if they are basic scientific actions. And that's what you see happening with the with mainstream economics. That's what they're constantly doing. They're constantly coming up with explanations for why the government needs to do this. They need to manage the money supply. They need to manage the unemployment rate. They need to manage the inflation rate. They need to ensure that the financial markets are functioning. All of it boils down to always arriving at the same answer, which is we need to print money. When I teach Keynesian economics at university, I teach them the textbook propaganda stuff. And there's always be a couple of lectures where I take some time out and explain it to them from, I take them out of the rat's maze and show them the maze from above. Tell them, look, this is why this is that way. If you really want to make sense of what's happening, just understand that this is a very elaborate story concocted with the explicit purpose of arriving at the conclusion that the government needs to be printing money in order to fix things. And so if it doesn't make sense to you, just think of it this way. And then suddenly it will. And many of them would say the same thing. Exactly. That's when it made sense. And before that, you're really struggling to follow their reasoning. You're really struggling to put together all of these factors in order to be able to understand why they're arriving at those conclusions. But then once you understand that, okay, there's an ulterior motive and there's a preset conclusion and they're just working their way out. Yes. They're working their way around in order to get to it. Then it all makes a lot of sense. But the problem for Keynesian economics, for Austrian economics, or I should say just economics, real economics, economics.
Science.
The problem for it is that it does not pay the bills. You can't, as an economist, you're not going to make a lot of money from telling people, no, you shouldn't run the money printer, and therefore you shouldn't pay me tons of money to tell you to not run the money printer, because how are you going to pay me if you don't have the money printer? You can pay a lot more economists with the money printer. So what I did, to answer your question, what can we do is I wrote this book. I'm selling it. I'm translating it to many languages. Go to my website, Saifedean.com, where you can find it and buy it. And if you can't afford it, feel free to pirate it. I'm very happy for people to pirate my book. You can always find it on Library Genesis. And tell people about it. And I think the other thing that we should be doing, and that I am also doing, which is buy Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin. The more Bitcoin goes up, the more people who are in this frame of mind, people who understand this, the more power and money and influence they have on the world, and the less the value of the dollar, and the less the fiat system has money and power and influence over the world, and therefore, the less their stupid propaganda propagates, and the more our correct science is propagated, and therefore, the better off we are.
It's well said. Yeah, it's like most things, follow the money and you find the truth, right? Even with the money, that it's corrupt because there's an incentive to corrupt it. And then if you corrupt it, you got to put the pseudo-scientific justification around it. And I'm optimistic. There's that other saying that science advances from funeral to funeral. So we need to just keep stacking sats and waiting for some of the old paradigm holders to die off. Looks like we have just a couple more minutes. I want to ask you one more question, if you don't mind. So I have been convinced in reading first of all, you introduced me to Austrian economics, so thank you. But in reading all these other Austrians, I think in a world where people are often touting first principles thinking, I kind of have this working hypothesis that the axiom of action might be the only first principle. It is like the only, and Hoppe makes this point. He goes, the reason it's axiomatic, the axiom of action, the purposeful use of means to pursue ends, or tools to pursue goals, to use different words. You can't argue against it, because if you try to argue against it, you're using the means or tools of words toward the goal of refuting the axiom. So again, you're in a performative contradiction. And basically everything we do is action all the time, unless it's some basic reflexive thing. That seems to be ontologically prior to everything else. Like anything we can say, anything we can summon intellectually, human action seems to be prior to that. So not only is Austrian economics like kind of this exiled science, it doesn't just need to be incorporated into the body or the body of science largely. I think it needs to be foundational. I think it needs to be like the primary study. Basically, it's like we learn more through studying human action. We learn through any of this other stuff. So I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there and see what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that. So yeah, read my book.
Thank you so much for doing this, man.
No problem. Thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.
Cheers.
Thank you.